2, 1, and we're rolling. Jake Newton, how are you?
Very good. How are you guys doing?
Very well. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, very happy to be here. I've been listening to the show for the first few episodes you've had rolling, and I'm honored to be on. It's a really cool concept you have, Animal Mind Podcast, and happy to be here.
Jakey, man, it's good to see you.
It's good to see you.
I understand
Good
you
to
guys
see
go
you.
way back.
We do, yeah, man. I know Zach talked a little bit about it. I think it was in the last episode, but yeah, he nailed it. I mean, essentially from birth, we've been around each other. His dad and mine have been long friends for as long as we've been essentially born, and for 27 years of my life now. Zach's a little bit older than I am. You're 28 now, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've been
Y'all young bloods.
yep.
I forget.
We've just been growing up together. I mean, we have literally known each other as long as we've pretty much been around. So I mean, just a lot of history, a lot of troublemaking, a lot of fun, a lot of. So just here's a quick story for you that kind of I would say be a synopsis of our childhood. I went up to Zach's dad's hunting camp one weekend for work weekend. And so Zach and I went out in the back and we found beaver dams because they told us to go out and rip them down so the water wouldn't back up so much. And we stepped into these mud holes and just got stuck and just had the most god-awful time getting these beaver dams out of there. And so we labeled these mud holes Sinkies. Because if you stepped in them, you're going up to your crotch.
You're going, man.
It's like there's nothing you could do. You're going in there, you're getting stuck, you crotch, armpit high. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So we started calling them Sinkies. And anyways, long story short, we had an absolute ball just getting filthy, rotten, dirty, and ripping down beaver dams. So
I don't even think Dad wouldn't even let us ride in the truck. We had to ride in the truck bed on the way home.
we sure did.
That's how all good vacations end. You can't ride in the truck. You got to ride in the bed.
Surprised you didn't make us walk for all the trouble we got in up there.
So, Jake, we brought you on the show not just because you're good friends of Zach's and he knows a lot of cool stuff about you, but also because you're a retired SERE Specialist from the Air Force. So can you tell us a little bit about that, and we'll get started in that direction?
Sure. Well, that's where do I start with that one, I guess, is how I would get started. But I, from a very young age, knew that I wanted to go into the service. It was not, something for me that I wanted to enter into the Air Force to avoid paying for college, or I didn't know what I was going to be when I was growing up. I knew that when I grow up, I was going to enter into the service. And so when I was a junior in high school, I was actually enlisted when I was 17 years old. I got my parents to sign off so I could enlist early. And I went into the delayed enlistment program. But I went to the recruiters, and initially I was going to sign up for the Air Force Special Operations career field, combat control. But as I talked to the career field recruiter, he said that my eyes weren't good enough. I have 2200 vision, and they need 2075 correctable to 2020. And so they started sifting through the career fields because they were starting to get a feel for the kind of person I was, and showed me the SERE Specialist pamphlet. And at the time, this was back in 2009, there wasn't a lot of information available on the career field, except that the pamphlet talked about you would become a survival instructor, you would teach air crew how to survive their worst nightmare, you go to airborne school and do all these different things. Essentially, the woods would be your office.
Man, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, so it was an awesome time. But as you can imagine, being a northern New York native, I immediately jumped on that because I'm a passionate outdoorsman and a very avid hunter, and so I said, "Well, yeah, sign me up." So it's considered a battlefield airman career field for the Air Force. So it has a rigorous entry. A high attrition rate to get into the career field. So we could certainly talk about that. But as a junior in high school, I determined, that's what I'm going to do. And essentially, once I learned that, I started training for the job.
Wow. What kind of training did you start doing?
So I wish I would have known to do more, but every once in a while I would have to get motivated. So I would watch Rocky. I would start the motivation with the eyes.
Hell yeah.
And I'd watch Rocky Balboa. And then it was a lot of just your typical physical fitness training. So running 2-3 miles, 4 miles. There's a loop around my hometown that if you run it, it was like 4.4 miles, I think. So eventually I built up to getting it around that loop in a certain time. But when I started, I wasn't in good shape at all. It was something I definitely had to train for. But I was doing push-ups and lunges and sit-ups and different calisthenics, mostly body weight type exercising, because I knew that was for the most part what I was going to have to probably do.
Right.
And when I started researching the career field, one of the main things that I would find out is just to get into the career field, you have to do a 4-mile ruck in under an hour with 65 pounds on your back. And so that was like an entry level test. And so I would do things to help build myself up towards that.
That sounds like a challenge for me tomorrow. I need something to do to get out of the house. 65 pounds, 4 miles, under an hour. Okay. We'll see.
Yep. You know, the first time I did it, it was an absolute smoker. I made it in like 58 minutes, I think it was, because the stipulation with this test is you can't run. Go Air Force, right? And,
you got to fly.
Yeah. So
flap your wings.
You got to walk her. They say you can kind of like strut, right? Mm-hmm. But so I tried to. Ultimately, the bottom line was get myself in the best shape I possibly could. But the downfall was actually when we got to basic training. I was actually in pretty good shape at the time, but Air Force wasn't that physically rigorous. And so at night before bed, we would do extra PT, physical training, push-ups, sit-ups, and everything, so that we could be prepared to go to selection after the fact, after basic, because the Air Force PT for basic training, what they already offered, wasn't enough.
So how many like push-ups are we talking? We know push-ups, we know sit-ups. What are we talking?
Yeah, the entry level for SERE isn't that bad. I think it's 45 push-ups, 45 sit-ups. So basically the entry level test is under 2 minutes. Yeah. So the entry level test is you have to swim, at least when I went through, you have to swim a 200-meter swim. At the time, it was not timed at all. Now it's under 10 minutes, I think. Then you have to run 1.5 miles in under, I think it was 11 minutes or 11 minutes and 30 seconds. You have to do 45 push-ups, 45 sit-ups, and then 6 pull-ups. And that's it. That's the entry level.
Okay.
So they basically say, okay, if you can do this test. Oh, and that ruck march was part of that okay. test as well. That's a little bit more down the road. And so they say, if you can do these things, and you're
trainable
at the basic level, able to go into this course and try to make it. So you do that multiple times in the first couple of weeks when you go to selection.
Okay, awesome. So you get selected. Now you're in. Mm-hmm. Where does your training go from there?
Yeah, great question. So you end and graduate Air Force basic training, and you go to this annex off of Lackland Air Force Base down in San Antonio called Medina. And this is where essentially they take all of the trainees and the selectees for the battlefield airman positions of the Air Force. And they stick us in this little hub, and you go through selection. So selection for the SERE Specialist career field is 2 weeks. I think it's 3 weeks now, but at the time it was 2 weeks. And it's 2 weeks on, 1 week on base, and then it's 1 week out in the field. And so you start off with that pass test, and if you pass that test, then you can actually go through selection. Then selection is on base. It's just essentially what we call a smoke session, right? It's their job to just try to make you quit. With the training, you're just getting beat into the dirt on base, essentially for a whole week. And then, on the weekend, we would go out to the field, and we would do our field portion of the training.
Okay.
And so they wanted to see, at the most basic level, are you competent enough to build a shelter? Can you build a fire? Can you communicate, because we're instructors, can you communicate at a basic level how to do something like that? And so they give us these random topics and say, talk about this topic under this structure for 3 to 5 minutes. And so if you pass that course, and if you basically don't quit, then you go to Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane, Washington, where you can then go through the core training, which if you include the preliminaries, it's about a year. If you just include the core actual training pipeline, like the core technical program, it's 6 months. And so out of my selection class, 10 of us made it out of the 31 that went through. I think it was 31. And there's like 6 selection classes that go through. So usually there's about 50, maybe 60 people that will make it to Fairchild. And then from that class, the core class, there's usually about 50 to 60 that start, and then anywhere between 10 to 25 that'll graduate the actual school.
Mm-hmm. Now, do they send you out on any survival kind of adventures or anything that you have to go out and do before you start teaching?
Yeah. So the one of the primary functions of the core school is to take you through the major climates so that you can effectively experience them and then be efficient enough to communicate what that experience is like to future students. And so the core pipeline is built into several different phases. The first phase you go into is called familiarization phase, where they'll take you out into the woods. You're out there for 10 days. It's heavy task saturation, where for a long time of the night, you're doing all these different tasks to essentially prepare for the next day's instruction. But there's a level of it where they want to keep you awake so that you can function with little sleep, so you know what it's like to operate under that kind of stress. There's an improvisation week where for a week on base, even prior to FAM, this is actually your true first phase, where you have to build all these different things out of parachute or out of canvas material, and you build it all by hand. And that's where people generally lose the most sleep. So, for example, you have to build a 3-strand rope that's 25 feet long with your hands out of 550 cord. And so that just absolutely wrecks your hands because you just get so many blisters from just over and over and over again with 25 foot of 550 cord. You have to build a 2-strand rope out of 550 cord, and there's certain standards. It's got to be tight enough to where they can't twist it apart, see through it, for example. And that had to be 20 feet long. We had to build a big water bag. You have to build several like holding containers. We'd have to build long trash bags, shelter pieces, sheaths, and all these different things that are designed to teach us how to do those things, but also to task saturate so we can figure out, okay, how do I manage my time? What does it look like to stay up for all hours? I mean, we got to the point in that first week of training, Impro week, they call it, that I was probably averaging an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours a night for a week. And some nights I went without sleep at all. And you just get to the point where you're hallucinating. And so we would be sitting in class the next day, and like I got a ferocious appetite for dip, because that was one of the only things that would keep me awake during this time. I dipped like it was going out of style. And so I'd throw in a chew and I'd stand up against the wall watching the instructor. And I'd be like 3 feet away from the wall and standing so I could just do my best to stay awake. They'd be teaching, and all of a sudden I fell asleep standing up, and I just wailed the wall right in the middle of the class. I fell back against the wall, and it woke me up. That was the first thing I hit. I was going on my back, and I wake up and the instructor's looking at me like, "Can we proceed?" They're like, just give me that look, go on with our, and they're like, everybody was like looking at me, like I'm that guy. And I distinctly remember the thread we would sew with was kind of like Kevlar thread and pretty thin. And basically it was black. So I would multiple times like see that stuff coming down the walls, and like I would feel like I have it on my hands. And so I'm constantly trying to like flick it off my hands, just get it off my body, but it's not there. I'm just hallucinating.
Wow.
And so it just crazy first week, and then you get the weekend off, and then it's after that week that you go out to the woods for 10 days and use all that gear, but you learn how to build a fire, you learn how to build a shelter, all the while, you're learning basic survival skills. They're just giving you so many tasks to stay up all night.
Oh, wow.
So that's the first.
So you're building things, you're getting used to the different climate acclimation to different types of climates. I assume very cold, very humid, maybe very dry, heat.
Yeah. So this first, there's two classes in a year. So the first class of the year is a winter class. They start FAM in the winter. I was a summer class, so I started FAM in the summertime. So for us, it was like pretty warm.
What is FAM?
FAM is the familiarization phase. That first phase where we're staying up all night and building shelters and learn how to do different things, find water. But that's our first indoctrination to how do you survive. And so that for us, it was pretty mild. It was for us the later part of training where you go into the wintertime that got more difficult for us. Whereas winter classes, they start off really difficult and then they end in the summertime. So it's like it's picking poison.
It's very similar in the fire department when we start a fire academy. Like, the recruits, we start them PT in the wintertime and they're complaining, but and then when their burns are in the summer, like just wait, you'll wish it was wintertime. And then in vice versa, you start them PTing in the summertime and then by the time it's winter, you're putting them in burns. So I don't know which is better.
So my story for FAM, I mean, multiple times, and it's hard to communicate just how hard these classes are. I mean, SERE school truly was the hardest thing I've done in my life by far. And I'll tell you some stories, but I have a story from FAM where I actually cut my hand wide open. It was like 3 days in, we were building our fire. It was one of our first firecraft lessons where they teach us how to do it and then we do it and then we're expected to do it in a certain amount of time. Build a fire from scratch. So you're cutting the tree down, you're making so many bolts of wood, you're bringing it all the way down to pencil-sized pieces and making your tinder from the inside of the tree, natural tinder, and you have to do it inside of a certain time frame. So one of the tools you can use to build your fire is a knife. And you can use a certain technique. Basically, you stab the wood with your knife, and you can basically rock the knife a certain direction and twist a piece of wood at the same time, and it'll actually split wood for you. You can split wood with a knife. So as I was doing that, my knife slipped out of the piece of wood that I was splitting, and it actually went right through my leather glove and cut my hand wide open right here between my thumb and my forefinger. And blood going everywhere. I didn't even necessarily recognize I cut myself as bad as I did, but I could see the red coming out of my glove and onto my wood. And so I put the pressure on it. I go over to my cadre, my instructor, and I say, I'm cut. And he said, all right, go see the medics. So this is probably 3 days in. And so I get all stitched up. They numb me up. I get stitches put in and they take care of it. But I get back to my instructor and I still had time to finish the fire. So I look at my watch and I'm like, I'm still good. So I run back to my location where I was building my fire, and I started chopping my wood up and continuing to go through with the firecraft, and blood everywhere all over my stuff. But I actually got everything split and done in time to where I built the fire within the time frame allotted, and I actually passed that fire.
Now, see, if I was an instructor, I would have been like, you know what? Good. We have an impromptu training session on how to stop a bleed. Let's go.
Well, so I actually got an excellent grade for that day because they appreciated my ability to adapt and overcome. But it was the days after that in FAM where my hand just got super sore from using my hands, with every single thing we did. And I got to the point where I was on the verge of quitting. And I went to my buddy. I was like, my buddy Adam, I said, man, I don't know if I can do this anymore. He's like, no, don't you quit. He said, you just keep right on going, keep plugging through. And it's in moments like that where it's the buddies on your left and on your right that help you get through those adverse times. And if it wasn't for those guys, I mean, I wouldn't have made it through that phase and gone on to the next phase, mobile, which is land navigation. But I mean, there's multiple times where just things like that happen throughout the training that are outside of your control. And you just have to basically either buck up and keep going or decide this is it. This is all I can handle. And like you guys were talking about earlier in the podcast, you truly are only ever going to engage a certain portion of your brain. Your brain is always able to handle more than what you're facing right now. You're only ever, engaging about, 40% of your brain. Your brain just has to tell your body to keep going, right?
Well, I was going to say, the guys on your left ear and your right ear are absolutely very important, but probably not as important as the friend between your ears.
That's so true. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And so I made it through that phase, but it's it's phase after phase like that. So land navigation was next, where they fill our backpacks full of heavy weight of all of our gear, and it was 7 days. I think we went about, it was like 65 or 70 kilometers, somewhere in there. So you're going about 10 kilometers a day up and down the mountains, and I mean your feet just get absolutely trashed. And you just get some people. We had guys break bones while they were out there. Guys that got kicked out of the training because they broke bones. And
how were they breaking bones?
So I mean, you're going up and down full-on mountains out here. It's the Western Cascades, and so when you have that much weight, it's your first time potentially backpacking with serious weight on your back. I mean, we were probably carrying between 80 and 90 pounds. It could have been more, maybe a little bit less with the water weight, depending where your water is at. But if you step wrong on one of those mountains, you're going for an absolute header, and you might not stop till you get to the bottom of the hill. And so, we had people just take some serious falls and break their bones. Guys would break bones in their foot. I think we had a guy break his ankle.
Yeah.
And so just serious stuff, And so you're out there learning how to navigate
totally
for your first time. And they do that basis. You learn how to navigate. Then, like you were talking about earlier, you go into all the different climates. So we did desert, we did the temperate environment, we did the tropics environment, we did the coastal environment, we did open ocean, and then you have the evasion and resistance aspects of the training as well. So we did a portion where we had to evade an enemy in a make-believe land called Limnadia. And as part of that is the resistance training, where you're a POW, a prisoner of war, and you have to survive that captivity. And,
wow!
Things like that.
What is that like?
It's intense. It's life-changing, as you can imagine. So you get a taste of it in one of the preliminary schools that you go through leading up to the actual core curriculum. But for us, this was the most stressful component of the training, but it was also the most enjoyable part of the training as well, because this was the first phase of training. It was evasion and resistance compounded together. And this is where they also teach us personnel recovery. How do you rescue people that are lost, essentially, right? So we were given a scenario where we're embedded into Limnadia doing a certain mission, and we get shot down or whatever the mission is, and then we're evading. So it's us out there by ourselves in our team, and then our instructors were the people that were looking for us. So they were effectively the enemy. And if you didn't get caught, you didn't necessarily go through resistance training, but some people did get caught. We got caught once, and that's a story in and of itself. But when you get caught, we have SERE specialists that are specially designated to be a prisoner of war or a hostage detention or a government peacetime detention instructor. So they're specifically trained on how to exploit you, but at the same time teach you how to navigate and survive captivity. And so for us, as you can imagine, we're coming into a brotherhood. So they like to give us a little bit more of a hard time, right? But for students that are coming through the school, if we bring people through resistance training and all we're doing is beating them up, we are not doing our job, right? Our mission is to give them confidence that if they ever are in that situation in real life, that they can navigate what it's like to really be a hostage or really be a prisoner of war. And so that's part of the training. That's part of the expertise that we provide.
Yeah, I like to always tell the recruits whenever they come in, it may seem like I'm trying to break you down, but my goal is definitely not to break you down. It's to build you up. But this is just the way that it gets done. So yeah, I totally understand that.
Resistance training is what we call stress inoculation training, where you insert somebody into the environment and introduce them to the type of scenario that they would have to go through in real life. And so it's effectively role play training. And as you can imagine, a lot of it is classified, but what I can say is, of course they're not breaking fingers. There's a lot of stories out there and things where, people are getting their fingers broken and all these different things. That we're talking about United States assets here. We're not going to break our own people before they go fight a war for us. But I will say, I've seen some things and I've been a part of some things and experienced some things that, holy cow, I would have never thought I would have ever experienced in my life. I mean,
but you say that with a huge smile on your face.
Yeah, you look so happy, man.
So I'm going to do to you like what my therapist does to me. He goes, "You're smiling when you say that." So I need to, let's dig a little deeper at that. What's making you smile?
So there's a picture on my dad's fridge at home that it's a picture of me after I finished my most terrible session. And it doesn't even look like me in the picture, but I mean, you're being physically beaten. I will say, for example, one of the things that happened to me is I was put into a creek, butt naked at one point in time, in the middle of November up in the mountains. And, that's just part of, coming into the brotherhood, so.
I was waiting for this to go Naked and Afraid. So when are you going to be on that program?
Man, I don't think I would ever want to be on that program, to be honest.
You can't. You wouldn't want to go there and school some people?
Well, they wouldn't have to gray out my midsection. I would just be fine without anything. I'd be fine, But so if you guys are familiar with the show Alone, there actually was a prior SERE specialist that went on that show and did amazing. His name was Mike in the second season. And there's been some SERE specialists that have done other shows and they do really well. But just generally people hear about the term of our career field and it just goes right over their head because they don't actually know what we do.
Yeah.
But it was the most amazing and most trying time in my life. I mean, I've never gone through a training program that really showed me what I'm capable of. I mean, when I got done with mobile phase, for example, I took so much skin off the bottom of my feet that I could cover a deck of cards with all of the skin.
Oh, wow.
Like just
blisters.
Yeah, blisters and just, blood blisters, just skin coming right off of my feet. And, cutting yourself. When you're in FAM, you get what's called FAM hands, where you get so many cracks and blisters and cuts on your hands that you get done and your hands are like all stiff and cracked and you can't hardly move them because they're just so beaten and tattered. And it's things like that over and over again throughout the training.
And that's just that repetitive building of things like the rope and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, when you get done, with this training, you truly have a chip on your shoulder. Like you just went through one of the most elite programs in the Air Force. I mean, the attrition rate is probably anywhere from 70 to 85% at any given time. It's a really challenging program to get into. And then when you're done, you enter into the actual operational side of it, where you're responsible for training aircrew members how to survive their worst nightmare. And so you're taking people out to the woods 1 week at a time and showing them how to survive and do basic survival, which is pretty cool. But that you get stories with that in and of itself, like stress like that, as you can imagine, on like a female, for example, tends to be really hard on their bodies. And so multiple times we would have females in a group out there hit their period, hit their cycle, and they don't know how to handle that in the woods. And so all of a sudden, like I had one time where I'm walking through snow and it looks like just absolute bloody murder on the top of the snow.
We went there.
Just got, and wow. But and it is gruesome, but that's the kind of stuff you're out there experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at Zach's face. I've never seen that face on him before.
It's in the Navy on a ship. You got there's 3,000 people on the ship. Call it 30% are women. And after a 6-month deployment, they all get synced up. and the sewage from the ship goes behind the boat, and every couple of weeks is Shark Week.
Yep, it's so true, man. It's so true. Like, and the same thing happens out in the woods. And so, you're dealing with things like that, and then you're also dealing with like these special operations trainees that come through, and some of them can be really airheaded or really gruff or really arrogant, and so you intentionally try to make life challenging for them, or they can be really awesome. Fighter pilots are actually my best students, but special operations and fighter pilots are, a lot of times they're particularly smart. So you can have really great groups where you can go a long distance and have a great time out there teaching these folks survival and how to evade and how to get themselves back into friendly hands. Essentially, I mean, if I always summarize it with, if you look at the POW MIA flag, that directly represents the career field I work for. The SERE career field is responsible for looking for like the remains of people we still have not found yet. So we oversee teams that, for example, that are in Vietnam looking for the remains of people that fought and died for the U.S. in Vietnam. We're looking for the remains so that we can bring them home. That's what our job is all about.
Wow.
And I'll tell you this. I've seen glimpses of Jake's skills and the stuff that he's shown me just on like normal backpacking trips. I stole those ideas like, just unabashedly, and I just rebranded them as my own as like some awesome, amazing woodsman that I just learned it all, But like we're getting ready to go camping, and I picked Jake up from the airport, and I go, so I got this fire starting stuff. You want me to bring that? And he looks me dead in the eyes, and he goes, don't you ever disrespect me like that again. And I was like, what? I was like, you don't want me to bring a lighter or something? He was like, you watch your mouth. And I was like, oh, all right. I didn't know. Then, and when you broke out your Katadyn water pump and you stuck it in like a dumpster of water, and you pulled out just like this crisp, delicious water, refreshing. I couldn't believe it, dude. I was
just put it in deer guts and suck out the water, and it's like, it's good drink.
I'll tell you what. So if you do a lot of camping, especially for your audience, I highly recommend the Katadyn water filtration system. I mean, you stick this thing, you could stick it into absolute sludge, and it's got a filtering mechanism where it uses like carbon and a few other things. It'll get out the giardia and all the things out of the water, but you want to talk about clean water. It takes care of business real sharp.
I second that. That Katadyn was mesmerizing. I run a Lifesaver bottle. Remember that big blue bottle of mine, Jake? Yeah, I ended up figuring that one out. You got to have two bottles to make it work. You got to have one to like grab water and pour it in the other. There's steps. But anyway, I would pick the Katadyn 100 times.
Yeah, I'll add it to the notes. Awesome.
Yeah.
So now you've moved from the training phase. You're now a SERE specialist, and I just want to refresh everybody who maybe didn't really know what SERE stood for. It's the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. So now you're instructing people. So were you only instructing Air Force? Are you instructing all military fields?
The career field, the Air Force. So this gets into personnel recovery. So the Air Force manages all of the different branches. So we have involvement with all of the different branches of SERE training. Me personally, I was working primarily with the Air Force and would have every so often students come in that would be like State Department, for example, or I would have the Army student occasionally come in, or Navy I had a couple times, because it generally at that time it was because they're going to be working with the Air Force. But the Air Force, because we have dedicated assets for personnel recovery, which is personnel recovery is the combined effort to get our people home, essentially, if they get lost or taken or isolated wherever they're working anywhere in the world. So that's personnel recovery. The Air Force manages that program because we have dedicated assets to do so. So many people are familiar with pararescue. They're a sister career field of ours, essentially, where we work together to get our people home. And so overseas, that's our job. So stateside, we're doing the training. Overseas, SERE specialists are organizing and implementing the programs and processes to get our people safe. So we set it all up, we're organizing it, we're working with folks to make sure they're prepared. And then if something does happen, we're coordinating that effort with several other career fields. And then, if it's not a joint effort, for example, like the pararescueman will actually go and put hands on those people and get them back in the aircraft, provide medical attention, and get them back safe.
Oh, wow. So how often were you going out on these survival type missions?
So it was once a month at a minimum. And then there's different things that you can go as like a special duty, where it's a temporary duty. They might send you, like, for example, I went down to Arizona one time for a 21-day multinational personnel recovery exercise where I was working with multiple countries from around the world. Ireland, Germany, Pakistan even was there, for example. And we're all working together to get better at getting our people home. And so once a month at a minimum, teaching air crew members, but we're all over at any given time. And there's only at any given time about 450 of us, and that includes the people that are going through training.
Oh, wow. How long would you stay out on these missions or these training missions?
So the typical core curriculum is generally about 1 week out in the woods. It's a 3-week school when people come out and go through our main school. And part of that is resistance, part of that is on base training, but the middle is the actual out in the field portion where we teach them, and it's like a Saturday to a Thursday, I think. So just under a week. A week.
And what kind of stuff do you take with you? I mean, do you go with what, say, a downed pilot would have on them? I mean, what would be the game plan for that?
So that's what the students will take, but of course it's training, right? So there's some safety aspects built in. So we would actually have them bring a full backpack full of gear. And it's twofold. So part of it is for the safety and part of it is for adding stress to it. So these people most often have never backpacked in their life. So we're adding that stress so they can feel what that stress of that situation is really like. But they do get sleeping bags and they do get like an MRE issued right up front. But there is food aversions that they have to go through. They have to eat all the nasty things, especially if their instructor can find things and want to make them eat those.
Dude, tell them the banana slug story.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So when we were going through tropics training, banana slugs were just so prevalent in that area. And their defense mechanism from getting eaten by everything is when you eat it, it essentially turns into super glue. And so you're chewing on this slug and it just sticks to your teeth. It sticks to your gums. And, you got to swallow this thing. They don't let you spit it out. Like, you have to swallow it because you're overcoming food aversions, right? And so you swallow it, and it's like still stuck in your mouth. So it goes all the way down your throat, and it's like touching the bottom of your stomach, but it's still in your mouth at the same time. So you're just like, so you're just like gagging, trying to get this thing down. But it's the gift that keeps on giving. Like, you chew on a banana slug and it's there for an hour and a half to 2 hours. You're just chewing on it, and it just doesn't go away.
It may be the gift that keeps on giving, but it's the gift I never asked for and never wanted.
Yes. Well put. Well put.
What other kind of stories do you have about feeding people nastiness?
Oh, so we would always play pranks on our students. So, for example, I would tell them that moose turds were like, what's that candy? Malt balls. And so one of the things I would do is I would set like three malt balls up right next to a big pile of like moose crap. And so then I would walk up and I was like, guys, great source of protein right here. And then I would grab them really quick until they could really identify that it was just candy. And I'd eat those and be like, all right, everybody grab some. Let's try them. And I eat 3 of them, but it's just chocolate for me. And I see how far the students will go,
Oh, that's horrible.
That's awesome.
That's horrible.
Hey, can you tell the story about the time you snared a deer or no?
Yeah, so that was when I was going through training. We snared an 8-point buck with my instructor, and we basically used one of our 3-strand ropes, and we found a nice deer run where the instructor found a nice deer run where this this buck, he knew this buck was going through back and forth, and we set up on it. We basically put a nice 3-strand rope around with a nice big loop and just waited for him to come through. And one morning he hammered it. We choked the snot out of this buck, killed him. I mean, we got this 8-point. I mean, he's big. He's probably got like a 20-inch spread, 18, 20-inch spread, 8, 10-inch tines, huge buck. But we ate good. We snared him.
I remember you told me that story, and I said some words that I'm not going to repeat. And then he showed me the picture, and I was like, I didn't even have the words. Like, I didn't even think that was he said it. I didn't think it was a physical possibility. And he showed me the picture, and I was like, okay, I'm not. Now I want him to come home and do that during hunting season. I got to see it.
Yep. So a little while ago, you were talking about how doing all these things and how they kind of changed your life. And how you kind of alluded to they made you a better person. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, man, I guess I would say when you go through a certain trial, it does a certain thing to help you understand more about yourself, and see what you're capable of. And there's certain things that when you go through fire, you get burned, and you see, as the burning starts to heal, how are you going to respond? Because that's a choice. You have a choice in how you're going to respond to these things. And so, you go through these trials, and one of the trials I was faced with was getting medically retired from the Air Force. And so one of the benefits that you have as a SERE specialist is you go through airborne school. Some guys get military free fall. Some guys get dive, depending on your specialty. But I got airborne, and airborne took its toll on my body, as did probably everything else that come along with that job. And my spine ended up just getting trashed. It was one particular jump mission that made it go over the top, and made me really realize that I just can't do it. Like it was essentially like I went through a car crash. I mean, the day after, I was just so stiff I could barely walk, and I was just in tremendous pain. And that started a long process of multiple months of MRIs and different scans and medical testing and consultations with back surgeons. But essentially, it got to the point where the Air Force decided that my back was bad enough to where I was, what they said, unfit for duty. And so, growing up, like I was saying earlier, it was my destiny that I was going to go into the Air Force essentially and do that for life. And so when I got to a point where the Air Force was saying, you're not going to be able to do this anymore, that was heartbreaking. And so for a process of about 18 months, I was figuring out, okay, well, who am I now? Because it took me a long time to figure out, I would say that almost part of my identity was being a SERE specialist. Mm-hmm. Like, this is who I am. Yeah. I am a U.S. Air Force SERE specialist, and this is what I do, and this is what I am. And so to be removed from that, it took me a long time to figure out, okay, who am I now, and what's next?
Right. So what is next for Jake?
So, well, I mean, the good Lord definitely had some great plans in store for me, but I'm truly blessed. But I mean, ultimately, I have a family now. I've got one son. I've got a second one on the way. He's going to be born in June.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We're trying to figure out what his name is. But since being retired, I was fortunate enough to be able to go right into a new job. And I ended up getting to a point where I did business development for that company and used my background in SERE for being an instructor to do teaching for that company. But I worked for a company that had a great mission, and that is to train people in the business world how to be safe when they travel abroad, and also survive extreme crises like an active shooter situation.
Oh, wow.
And so I led the business development for that company. And then I just actually recently started a new position with another company that is similar to the SERE mission actually as well. And they're a travel risk management and emergency travel assistance company. So that company is called On Call International. And I'm a regional sales director.
Regional sales
Nice.
director. Nice. So what type of things do you train people on travel?
So generally, it all comes down to prevention. Getting yourself into a place where you prevent things from happening to you as much as are in your control. So, it's common for people to be overseas and doing this all the time.
Yeah.
Or even in the US, right?
Right.
We're constantly on our phones.
Yeah.
Our phones are constantly in front of our face. And so one of the big things we teach is situational awareness, understanding what's going on around you. And when something does start looking off, what do you do about it? And so those are the kinds of things that we'll talk through. And how do you avoid getting mugged? How do you avoid getting robbed? How do you avoid getting killed in an active shooter situation? That can happen overseas, as we just saw in New Zealand, for example. But how do you keep yourself safe in any circumstance that you might face traveling abroad? Generally, it's petty stuff, petty crime. So it comes down to being aware.
Step number 1, pull out your gun.
So
very American. Yeah, I know.
So it sounds like, so your recommendation is a situational awareness. How do we teach people situational awareness? Because we are still learning that in our fire department. We are constantly going into situations that we may think we're safe when we're not. And I'll give you an example. We're trained to go into fires. We know what the danger is there. We know it's heat, right? We know it's structural collapse. We know things like that. There's many calls that I've been on, say diabetics or post-ictal seizures or different altered level of consciousness, drugs, heroin, things like that, where I've gone in situations where we are realizing a little too late that there's knives or guns involved, and we're having to back out. And so we, as a fire department, are still trying to learn this concept of situational awareness. So how do you teach that? How do you teach people to have a higher level of situational awareness?
For your situation, it's going to be a little bit different because you're going into a bad situation in the first place, right? So it's going to be tailored to that a little bit different than it would be for like your average traveler going overseas for vacation.
Yeah, they're avoiding.
Exactly. So we want to tell them, okay, in the first place, you need to keep your head on the proverbial swivel. Not like you're paranoid, but you need to understand that you're not impervious to things happening to you. So you need to be looking around at your surroundings rather than looking at your phone. If you're lost, take a moment to sit somewhere, regain your control, regain your composure, figure out where you need to go, and then put your phone back in your pocket and continue walking. Sometimes it could be something like listening to your intuition. If you feel like something is wrong, trust your intuition and do something about it. But part of situational awareness as well as being a little bit more inclined to do some research ahead of time. So if you're going to Paris for the first time, do some research. What are people like there? What are people not like? And then when you get there, I always say, establish a basis of normality. What is normal life here in Paris? How do people act? How do people drive? What does a conversation look like? What do the buildings look like? And so when you establish that normal, now you can look for things to recognize that are not normal. And that's how you continually be aware of your surroundings.
Right. And I like how you mentioned intuition there, but is that something that we can exercise more or maybe learn to use more, or is it either got it or you don't?
That's a really good question. I would say, if I could be stereotypical, women seem to have it better than men.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Where they just all of a sudden, like my wife will say, that just doesn't feel right. It's just not feeling right.
Right.
Where does it come from? Man, I gotta say it's a God-given thing to humanity. Like, we are designed to recognize danger. It's that the fight or flight response, right? You
Right.
recognize in your body, you just have that sixth sense that something is brewing here, something is imminent, something is not right, and I need to do something about it. And I do think, like you were getting at, I do think it can be dismissed. It does need to be, I think, paid attention to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think every person has it. Where it comes from, that's science. That's way over my head.
I think that possibly as a society, for some reason, maybe it's because, I don't know, the media kind of waters down our exposure to hectic and crisis-related events, that maybe we turn down our intuition. You know, it's like, well, just another day. You know, it used to be like when my wife and I were talking the other day, and they said, what was the earliest news story that you can remember? And this might predate you guys a little bit. The earliest news story that we can remember was a young girl who got caught in a well, and it was a big, big deal.
Wow.
Do you remember that? Or were y'all...
I don't know.
Okay. I want to say we were like 6 years old. And so there was a small girl, maybe 2 or 3 years old. I can't remember her name, but the news and the media covered it for a week. She basically fell into a well and was down there for a week. And then they did rescue her. And when they pulled her out, you know, her limbs were all black and everything, because I don't know exactly what her injuries were that sustained her, but they thought they were going to have to cut all her limbs off as a baby. She ended up surviving. They put her in a hyper oxygenated chamber, and it was able to save all of her limbs except for like a toe or something. But she's an adult now. She's older than, you know, we are. But
Wow.
but the point of that is, that story, if that came out today in 2019, it would have been like on a Twitter feed and be like, nope, and gone. And it, you know, because it doesn't sell advertisements, you know. But I remember when we were young, just watching that, and it was on, and it was on, and it was on, and it was on. My mother was like, never go around a hole, you know, never try to jump over a hole, you know, never, like the fear that it gave parents for this child that got trapped in this well. And I guess my point is that with all of the fast happening 24-hour news media, we're seeing so many things, so many crises all the time, that maybe our intuition about crisis is being subverted in some way.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I mean, and it's just part of our culture. We're so reliant upon technology. We're less reliant upon our own bodies. I mean, if you think about the old days even, and this is kind of going off in a different direction, but if you think about way back in history, people relied on the constellations.
Right.
And, you know, they relied on their intuition, what they knew, and how the ingenuity that they had to figure things out. They were relying upon their own bodies more for answers, rather than going to the Google machine and finding the answer there.
Oh, that's so true. And I was reading a book. I can't remember which book it was in, but it started talking about how we as humans, by not using like our intuition, not using our brain as storage anymore, like we're not really storing facts, because we're storing them on our external hard drives on our phones.
Yeah.
We don't have to learn anything. We can just go grab the facts when we need it. If you want to look at it in real hardcore, they used to teach math, and you know, you'd have to know your times tables really fast and all that kind of stuff. And now it's just calculator. Got a calculator. Why do we need to teach that?
So true.
Yeah. So we're turning down intuition and maybe brain power, but it could be that it's just changing. I don't know if it's getting weaker. It's probably getting stronger in some things and getting weaker in others. So the baby was baby Jessica. It was 1987. She was 18 months old, and she fell in a well in her aunt's backyard in Texas. And they took her 56 hours to free her, baby Jessica. And it's stuck in our brain something today that I just feel like would have just been here and gone. You might have heard about it one day, but it was so effective on my wife and I that at like 5 years old, we remember that story. And now you ask us how many active shooters there have been over the past year. We're like trying to put them together. You know, we're mashing stories. Well, was that in the theater that happened? No, that was in the mall, you know,
right.
That kind of stuff. We're just not even, you know, it's just so fast paced.
It really is, and it's so unfortunate that today's culture is taking issues like these and seemingly politicizing everything. And not to get into politics, but it's hard to find true information and information that is factual information that doesn't have a spin or doesn't have a bias.
Yeah.
And and so, maybe we're at a time where there's a demand where we need to go back to looking at the constellations a little bit more and looking at our surroundings a little bit more, just because that's, it's not going to fail you.
Oh, absolutely.
Well said.
So the name of the book is What Doesn't Kill Us, and it's the Wim Hof book that I've talked about several different times. What Doesn't Kill Us, How Freezing Water, Extreme Altitude, and Environmental Conditioning Will Renew Our Lost Evolutionary Strength. And so basically it's a memoir about this guy going to study with Wim Hof, known as the Iceman. Are you familiar with him and all of your SERE training? I don't know if he's...
the name Wim Hof sounds familiar, but I know I haven't read that book.
Yeah, so he's well known in circles for his ability to withstand cold weather temperatures and things like that. But anyway, so yeah, What Doesn't Kill Us? He talks about Wim Hof, and it kind of surrounds the book. Kind of talks about him, but then it goes over here and then it goes over there. I don't know if it was filling space, but it does talk a lot about how. Sort of the microevolution that we're going through with humanity, with technology and things like that. We're relying less on things like intuition and following the stars and all that kind. So
interesting.
Yeah. So this is a good time to transition into leaving the military. And you touched on it just a little bit. And you were saying that, this is something that you wanted to do since you were very small. And how did that affect you to go from SERE Specialist, Air Force, to going into civilian life?
Yeah, that was a hard process. I mean, I'm thankful that I had a support network around me. Like, fortunately, right at the time I was exiting the Air Force, I was also into the relationship that would become my marriage and joining, with the love of my life. But it was a long process, and don't get me wrong, there's still even days today where I'll have very introverted days where I just I'm longing for it, and I just feel so nostalgic. But I mean, I don't know that I would say I had depression necessarily, but I certainly asked the question multiple times and just had total down and out days where I didn't want to get out of bed, and why me? What is happening? This wasn't supposed to happen to me. Disbelief and what am I supposed to do now? I'm not going to be able to play with my kids, and because I mean, when the injury first happened, I might as well have had sleepless nights. I might have gotten 2, 3, 4, 5 intermittent hours throughout the night of sleep. And just terrible sleep, and I couldn't sit down. I had to stay standing up just because any shifting or motion of my spine was just excruciating. Or if I did finally get sitting down, that's where I was staying for a long time. And so just navigating this season of significant pain, but also significant loss, and being a type A personality, I wanted to tell myself that it's just the next thing. I'm just moving on. I don't need it anymore. But I had to learn how to grieve. And when I finally started doing that, I slowly had the building blocks that I could start replacing and start filling in with, okay, how do I use this experience for my next season of life? And that took a while.
And what was your exact injury to your back?
So I have now multiple degenerative diseases. I have a degenerative disc disease. I've got a degenerative joint disease, and it's something else that's degenerative. Basically, the vertebrae themselves are degenerative. I have spondylolysis, I think is how you say it. I also have a problem where the bone is like kind of squeezing into my sciatics. So I've got issues with those at times. I have, because of how the bone is wearing away in my vertebrae, I have my discs that are like bulging into those areas that are wearing away. And so I have essentially bulging discs. So, I mean, I'm all sorts of jacked up. It's like in my it's in my lumbar. I don't know what specific vertebrae, but it's like my L2 through my L3, 4, 5 or something like that, up into kind of my lower mid back. And so that has side issues as well, that it's kind of extended into my hips, because it's messing with all my muscles in my lower back.
Sure.
And so now on like a daily basis, I have to kind of turn and pop my hips and kind of adjust my hips. And I've got problems with those now because just all the muscles have been, warped and tightened. And
yeah, where there's an imbalance anywhere, it throws the whole body off. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I'm just dealing with that in my hips, and it's a daily process. I mean, my wife was telling me the other day, she was talking to, I think, the chiropractor or somebody, and she was just saying, your husband's probably gotten to the place where he doesn't even realize he's in pain anymore, because he's gotten to the point where he's just dealing with a certain level of chronic pain on a daily basis. I said, yeah, that sums up pretty well.
Are you going to have to go to surgery for anything?
Well, on my way out of the service, I went to a spinal surgeon, and this is part of the reason why I was removed from the service. At the time, he said I was too young to have a fusion. So they said, we're going to recommend that you never essentially carry a backpack again. But I certainly could now, I think, but I'm quite apprehensive, because I see a lot of natural remedies out there, yoga and different things, that I'm seeing advancements made in the medical technology and the medical community that seemingly might be less invasive if I don't have to go under the knife. And I've also just changed my lifestyle. I calculate risk, and is it something that I want to take on, or is it something that I don't? And outside of that, if the good Lord wants to heal me, that's what I pray for on a regular basis too.
Sure, and we'll be praying for you as well. So
no doubt.
So earlier you said that basically putting yourself through controlled levels of suffering kind of made you a better person. It helped you realize that you have much more that you can give, and that you're not limited in your scope as a human being, as a man. How important do you think it is for people to put themselves through levels of controlled suffering to reach their prime?
I just recently read a book called Why Suffering. It's a book by a guy named Ravi, Zacharias. He's an apologist out of Oxford.
Yeah, I love Ravi. He's good.
Yeah, he co-wrote that book with a guy named Vince Vitale, I think, and he summarizes suffering in a way that totally clicked with me. And towards the end of the book, they said, suffering is one of the biggest reasons that people deny the existence that there's a God. But truly, it's also potentially one of the biggest reasons that shows that there is a God as well. Because if you think of all of the good times that you've had in your life, what growth did you experience from those good times?
Right.
Essentially none. It's in the good times that we coast. It's in the good times that we feel the enjoyment, and we want to stay in that place. But it's when we face that suffering that we have a choice to make. We're either going to go through the suffering, or that suffering is going to overtake us. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes the trial that we're faced with wins. But because trials do come and they're inevitable, when you make the choice to make it through that, it's inevitable that you're going to grow. For better or for worse. You could become bitter on the backside, or you might become thankful, but the nature of trial and the nature of suffering makes you learn things about yourself that you didn't potentially know about yourself, and makes you on the backside have a certain tolerance for now that level of trial that you just succeed that you just succeeded and successfully made it through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to put it with weightlifting. If you're just going to lift 25 pounds, you're going to put 225s on your barbell and just bench press that all day. You just get really good at bench pressing that, but you're not experiencing any kind of growth in either muscle or strength. And so, yeah, suffering sucks, but there is controlled suffering and there's uncontrolled suffering. And I like to look at these two things.
Yep.
Controlled suffering is like when you're out there, you're training those guys to go out there and do the SERE stuff. Uncontrolled suffering is like your back problem. Now, so you could not have controlled what happened with that, but you have gone out and put yourself in certain situations eating banana slugs on purpose, even though you know it sucks. And you know that those things have helped you to become the person that you are, which makes it easier to handle some of the things that are uncontrolled. So as a society, we tend to,
I would say, avoid it.
Yeah, we avoid all suffering, but to our own demise.
Right. Well, that's I would say the quintessential summation of like Buddhism, right? It's you try to rid your life of all suffering,
and it's impossible,
and you just can't do it. And so if you're going to be faced with it, and it's what you do with that suffering, that trial, that is going to define you as a person, how you come through that. And that's when you see people that, we all cherish, these people that have gone through significant, difficult times, Holocaust survivors or whoever. They come through the backside and they learn from that experience. And by not becoming bitter and not becoming jaded by these experiences, they grow through it and in a certain way appreciate that circumstance because it made them the person who they are. It's part of who they are.
So how do you think that we as fathers, I'm a father, you're a father, about to be a father times two, and Zach's a father, how can we as fathers create some of this controlled suffering in such a way that the want for this controlled suffering for our kids to make them better? Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, pick me.
Go, Zach.
What you do, it's wintertime. You spray them with a hose. You chain them to the porch. No, I'm just kidding. I think my dad.
So you're in
and
control.
Jake,
they're not in control. I want them to be in control.
I am the danger. No, I think that growing up, like Jake and I had this like idyllic boyhood where our dads were just absolutely ridiculously brutal at times, in the most comical ways. And like Jake's dad was a master and still is a master at creating controlled suffering, even to me as an adult now. And I think back to when we were being kids and Tim would tell us to go, Tim is Jake's dad, to go mow the lawn. And we would mow the lawn and we would weed eat the lawn and we'd be super proud of our job. And he would come out and find a 1-inch swath of grass that we missed and proceed to berate us on the lawn in front of the neighborhood. And I'm not going to do the Tim voice just in case he listens, but I got a pretty good Tim voice. And he would berate you and tell you, hey, you missed this part. It looks like a cornfield in my yard. You're embarrassing me. And then you get push-ups and you get sit-ups, and then you'd have to go back and clean. I'd have to do it again. And then he'd look and he'd find one more blade of grass, and it was never ending.
You got to do the Tim voice, man.
Oh my goodness, there's a whole swath of corn in
there. I think you hit the nail on the head, though. I think it's about giving them work and responsibility that's just not necessarily comfortable.
Well, I say that, but then as an adult, the man like gutted me in front of my wife one day, and in the best way possible. I was talking about teaching Ashlyn's brother how to throw a baseball, and he had never thrown a baseball as hard as he could. That's like a classic American childhood, man. You got to throw a baseball, and he never owned a glove. So I went and bought him a glove, and he kept throwing the ball at me like it was like he was trying to throw a fart. It was just like coming, it was just like floating over to me. I was like, Brian, throw the ball. He goes, I don't know how. So what I did was I went over to the fence and there's a fence across the street, and I threw the ball as hard as I could at the fence, and I showed Brian what it looked like to throw a ball as hard as you can. Well, of course, Brian throws it, and it goes over the fence. He missed the fence. It's a 10-foot fence. I don't know how he missed it. And so I'm retelling this story to Jake, and Jake and Katie are laughing, and my wife's laughing, and I go, yeah, well, I threw the ball as hard as I could, and I paused, and from upstairs, I didn't even know he was in the house, Jake's dad goes, and I hit the fence 15 seconds later. And I'm like, so here I am telling this story, roasting this kid for not being able to throw a baseball, and Tim just absolutely rubs my nose in it. And it's that kind of, but I learned a valuable lesson. Don't pick on little kids that day.
Oh, man. I think it all comes down to allowing kids to experience trials, because they're going to as well by nature. I mean, you could look at my son. He just loves to explore and adventure. And I let him do that, short of the point where I see a future hurt, where he's going to hurt himself. And so letting them figure things out and not coddling them at every turn, so that they can be able to have some experience as they're going through their own lives, because we're not always going to be there for them.
Yeah.
I found also recently, like, just on the topic of suffering with the neck injuries that I have now, similar to Jake's with the minor C3, 4, 5, and 6. My dad always used to tell me, like, oh, you can handle all your problems. You got broad shoulders. You can carry that weight. And now here I am, 28 years old, and I can't even, like, carry my arms. So it came down to, like, an issue of, I can't carry this weight anymore. I can't stand tall with the weight of my own suffering and stress. And I found out real quick, real hard, and real dirty, it was time to get on my knees and let that go.
Yeah.
And that's one lesson that I'm trying to do right now is my kids have seen me over the last few years suffer through my transition, post-traumatic stress, body injuries, and all sorts of neat and nifty military stuffs. And for the first time today, actually in a long time, they saw me not sore from beating the snot on myself in the woods or working 60 hours a week. The first time in a long time they've seen me sore from worshiping a little too hard at the service.
Dude, that's
cool.
awesome.
So, I mean, as far as the suffering goes and controlled suffering, the lesson that we all learned today with the controlled suffering can be a happy thing and not a dad just spent 3 hours in 30 below weather trying to kill squirrels thing.
And that's powerful for a child to see their father worship like that as well.
My dance moves are way outdated. I got to get back in the game.
Well, Jake, it's been awesome, and I so much appreciate it. I know we could fill probably 2 or 3 more shows with some of your knowledge, so that means we need to have you back on. But we're getting to about that time where we're going to have to start winding down the machine so they cool down.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on the show, and would be honored to come back, especially just, I mean, what you are doing with this show, the topic and the things that you're talking about, but I think just inherently it's going to become a widely distributed thing. But thank you for having me on, and look forward to Friday.
Thanks for coming, brother.
Yeah, thanks for
Great
being
chatting
here.
with you guys.